All right. Well, Alaina, I'm so glad to be sitting down with you. We were joking as two people that are pretty interested in
Mhm.
technology. Our calendars decided that they had gremlins in them and decided to replicate a million times. So thank you for bearing with that. It's ironic given our backgrounds. But I am trying, you're a guinea pig, if you don't mind. I just got back from South by Southwest, which is a
Mhm.
fairly big music, film, and interactive festival in Austin, Texas. And we did a panel. And one of the things that we tried on the panel was starting with this sort of like flash round, and it's just a way
Mhm.
to get the juices flowing. It's mid morning for me. It's early afternoon for you. So if you're willing to try just one word answers, but I'm going to throw these out to you, and you tell me, and hopefully this will allow people to get to know you a little bit better as a person. You ready to go?
Mhm. I'm ready.
All right. So answering in your own voice, if I could only watch one genre of movies for the rest of my life, it would be
Comedy.
comedy. That's a good one. Okay.
Mhm.
My perfect flavor combo is
Oh, chocolate and nuts.
chocolate and nuts. That's a good one.
Mhm.
Okay, I like that. Um, I gave some examples because I wasn't sure, how clear this was going to be. And again, this is my first go around with these. And then this is sort of a bigger than a bread box one, but the world
Mhm.
would be a better place if blank.
Ooh, that's a big question. It can go a lot of different directions, but I'll stick to kind of my lane here and just say, um, really, if innovators built with both ambition and responsibility, so that as we created economic growth and opportunity, it wasn't leaving humanity or segments of humanity behind.
That's a good answer. Thank you. And that's foreshadowing to the bigger conversation we're about to have. So let's dive right in. We're going to get to the women who code, which is sort of how I found you. And
Mhm.
it's, I love what you did there. But I always like to do my research on my guests. And according to LinkedIn, you went from an international niche product manager. This is an official title. So I
Mhm.
was like, that's kind of cool. At Puma, which a lot of people have heard of, the footwear outlet or store, starting in 2004 to becoming the co-founder of Women Who Code in 2011. Tell us a little bit about the backstory of Women Who Code, like what led you to start it, and ultimately, I know you had to wind it down back in 2024, which hurt my heart a little bit. But let's
Yeah.
talk about the positive and how did you get there, and how did you go from being that brand manager, a
Yeah.
product manager?
I mean, I started in the product world, and I'd had a pretty strong career with some pretty big name brands in the traditional product world. And after I finished my MBA, I had an opportunity to move out to San Francisco, which was just on my list of if you get a chance to do this, go out there. And I got out there, and people were like, oh, you worked for Puma, you worked for Versace, like the clothing companies? Like, what about Google, Microsoft, Facebook? And I kind of was running into barriers that I hadn't experienced before. So I taught myself to code nights and weekends through community events. And what I was seeing is coming from that traditional business world. I was working at Puma. I saw performance wear, fashion, healthcare, media, all of these were becoming technology companies, which seems very obvious at this point in time, almost 15 years later. But I saw that data security was going to become as important as financial security, and seeing more, if I wanted to see more women in leadership, I needed to see more women in the tech industry because they would be running technology companies. Um, so it started as a passion project, at tech companies meeting up once a week, twice a week, three times a week sometimes. And I, at some point, just landed on, hey, this is really important. We have this here in San Francisco, but the world deserves to have it too. And the focus around it being on women excelling in their careers was data points that were coming out around women leaving their technology careers at that 10-year mark, right when they should be poised to accelerate in their careers, and their male counterparts were accelerating in their careers. And the industry was um, it didn't have enough engineers to support its needs. And as every industry was becoming a technology industry, every company was becoming a technology company, If my vision was to see women in leadership, I needed to see women succeeding in tech and along tech career paths. And that's, the long, the long story of how I found my way there.
No, well, I mean, it's a great organization. And again, I'd love to talk a little bit about sort of how
Mhm,
it wound down. And I think we could all probably guess why that
mhm,
was. But I think just to paint a picture, going back to 2011, I'm a guy that was doing technology literally back in the early 90s
mhm,
because my dad was a computer programmer early in his life, punch cards, if
mhm,
that paints a vision for you. Um, so 2011, I think today there are a lot more women in tech and a lot more women that do code. And I'd like to think probably women who code played a role in that. But it was definitely a little bit more of a wasteland. It is ironic now that we have generative AI and tools like Claude that maybe that we won't even need to code. We'll just need to actually be really great prompt engineers. I think
mhm.
we're already finding that out. But let's talk a little bit about sort of maybe the women who code at its peak and then sort of what led to the downfall.
Yeah, so I mean, Women Who Code was really part of a zeitgeist that was happening around thinking about policies that were inclusive and a time when the tech industry was growing in a very particular way, and that was a very segmented way of we hire someone and they are a front end engineer. We hire a few more people and they are back end engineers, and UX was separated from product management, and design was separated from front end, and so you really had specialists in each area of technology teams, and so you needed much bigger technology teams within your organization. But it was also at a time when traditional companies were all going through the digital transformation age and becoming technology companies. With Women Who Code, we are kind of really moving forward around that. It's still an important thing. It's still something that is happening. When we look at the way the market is going now, having you know women represented in leadership is still critical for the success and growth of companies and innovation of companies. But with Women Who Code, around the time I was leaving the company, I left about a year before the operations transitioned. Um, I or I Shortly before the operations transitioned. Um, that was really around, you know, the tech layoffs of 2023, whereas the majority of our budget was coming from technology recruiting budgets. And with the election year and really a really um, damaging corporate shift around inclusivity inside of organizations, just led to hesitance and a lack of budget. But through that, what we did is we shut down the operations that we were running. The company was acquired. It still exists today, and the communities that we released to the volunteers that had been building and growing these companies over years resulted in more than a dozen new organizations with new leadership being developed within weeks. And so when you look at it as hey, we're going to do a shutdown announcement, there's really something actually powerful and magical and innately Women Who Code that continued to happen.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I guess the good news is that you were able to transition from that and helping women and putting them into leadership positions in the tech world, um, to going to, and scaling to 147 countries, which is not insignificant.
Mhm.
You're now in this new chapter. You transition to going from a nonprofit leader to investing in startups. So I'm going to lead right into this next question, which is Valor Ventures, which I
Mhm.
believe is your new company. You focus on B2B, artificial intelligence, and software as a service in the South. And then we know that while the South is not like a third world country, I don't know if we're allowed to even
Mhm.
say that anymore. The South definitely does lag behind in a lot of, particularly technology capacity or in a technology capacity. So how are you using your seat at the table as a venture partner to ensure this inclusive culture we just talked about isn't just a buzzword, but a core
Mhm.
requirement for the startups you fund?
Yeah, I mean, what I think is most lacking in the Southeast is investment. They're amazing founders here, and they don't have access to the capital that, New York and San Francisco has access to. So when I see that, I see it as a huge opportunity. In choosing to take a path in investing, my why is supporting other entrepreneurs. How that's showing up for me professionally is through investing. But the part that gets me to wake up every day and excited to do what I do is any small support that I can give to founders that I come across in my role. And I will say, as things are changing right now so quickly, AI is just transforming the industry at a speed that is unprecedented. It's an incredible place to be sitting is in investing. You're looking at the way people are innovating both internally and externally with AI and building with AI and you know building AI on a daily basis and also being in a very AI forward firm, not just how we're investing, but also what we're building and using internally is if I'm not out there building, this is a really interesting place to be in this moment.
Well, so a couple of splitting of here. So one, you had said here, I knew that you meant Atlanta because you had mentioned that to me up front.
Mhm.
And it is interesting because I do feel like there's sort of the new South and then there's the old South, right? And so I
Mhm.
guess, do you bleed into the Mississippis or the Alabamas or other places like that versus, I think a lot of people look at Atlanta as a fairly modern, forward
Mhm.
thinking city now where some of the other areas may be a little less so.
Yeah, we invest in the Census South, but that's there's like in the area there's tech hubs throughout the Census South. Atlanta, where I'm located, happens to be a very strong one. It's one of the most educated cities in the country and has a lot of momentum around it from a technology perspective. But it's still an area that isn't getting the look that you see on the traditional coast companies or coast cities, and so it's still a tremendous opportunity for us and for other investors.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we will talk more about AI and the impact on
Mhm.
jobs in a second. But there was something that really struck me that I loved, and it's you've spoken about this upcoming shift in capital markets.
Mhm.
And what was interesting is I just had a woman named Faith Popcorn who's a futurist, and she works heavily in the marketing space. She's in her 70s, and amazing woman, amazing perspective. And she talked about women really sort of taking you look at it as the shift in overall capital markets. She looked at it as more empowerment in the consumer space. But I
Mhm.
love that both of you are thinking this way. So how do you see this transfer of wealth specifically benefiting women and diverse founders over the next decade?
So, I mean, you had the Great Wealth Transfer, which is what you're referring to right now, which is about 130 trillion dollars over the next 25 years is moving hands, and 70% of that is going to women. So some of the things that we know that the data shows us is younger generations are more willing to invest in non-traditional markets and really in innovation. And so that creates a lot of opportunity for founders out there. But with it being, women, they are coming from a perspective of historically not having that power, which means they can and will do things differently. And so it's being an optimist. I see that as a chance for underrepresented founders for more innovation than less. If you can see, not doing things the way they've always been done, it means there's room for innovation.
Well, it's funny because the other thing that came up in our conversation with Faith Popcorn was Mackenzie Scott, who is Jeff Bezos's uh, ex-partner, and the fact that there was a stat that I believe this year she is on track to give away more money in a single year than Bezos, Gates, Warren Buffett, and a lot of these other sort of very well-known, wealthy
Mhm.
philanthropists. And so, just speaks to the power of women and the fact that women, we could do a lot better if women were sort of put in power, and hopefully this trend is going to continue.
Yeah.
Um, this is one that I struggle a lot with, and you recently posted about drowning in messaging apps. So I know we just took a hard right hand turn here. And actually, the fact that you mentioned this app sort of brought a smile to my face. Some people may not be familiar with it, but you talked about needing the simplicity of old tools like Meebo. So maybe you could take a second to sort of talk about that. But as someone at the forefront of tech, how do you personally protect your deep work time from this constant digital noise? Because we know from a hardwiring perspective, psychologically, our brains don't do their best work when we're sort
Mhm.
of bopping all over the place. And as you've said, we are inundated with a million different apps right now. So tell us a little bit about what Meebo was, what the
Yeah.
role it played, and then let's talk about this, how you protect your deep work.
So I used Meebo in my salad days, probably dating myself, but I one of Women Who Code's first advisors was Elaine Weary, who was uh, a co-founder of Meebo, and so it stands out for me doubly in that thinking. But what it did is just pulled all of your social messaging apps in one place, and so you could just message, whether it was MSN or AOL or Skype or all of these apps, and just all in one place. You didn't have to kind of toggle between multiple apps, and between WhatsApp and Signal and Telegram and all of the texting, Slack. Yeah, I could definitely use some consolidation to uh, communicate with these days.
So it's funny that brings about two things. One is there was something called Friend Feed, which lasted
Mhm,
probably for a hot minute. That was
mhm,
similar to Meebo. And then if you ever watch The Office, I know I'm dating myself now, but Ryan, who is the Office temp for a while, created an app called Woof, and this really goes back to it was taking faxes,
mhm,
emails, texts, and I think another thing, and would consolidate them into one particular stream. But let's talk about that. How do we, since we don't have Amiibo today, and we
mhm,
are in, I think every day there's like a new channel that crops up. How do
mhm,
you personally protect and maybe advocate for others to say, this is how you sort of shut down the noise or pause the noise or handle it, but still allow that
mhm.
time to do that deep thinking and processing and getting the best out of your brain?
Yeah, I would say it's still something I struggle with, and in using AI, I actually can jump in a deep way from project to project because I'm crafting the prompts for what I need and getting deeply into something quickly, kind of coming back 20 minutes later to that. But I would say I have an old-fashioned kind of Pomodoro timer that I set on my desk, and I will say, hey, I'm gonna answer emails for 25 minutes, and I just set it and it kind of vibrates when I've completed 25 minutes. But it's a struggle for me, so I'm happy to hear other people's magic sauce on staying focused and really parsing out the influx of people trying to grab your attention and the deep thinking that you actually need to be creative and move the needle.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And sometimes it is old timey techniques like that timer, right? Where it's like I'm just
Mhm,
going to go full blast. I'm going to focus, and it doesn't have to be hours at a time, right? I think that's the
mhm,
other thing people think is like you have to do this for 2 hours or 5 hours. And it's like it can be 25 minutes. You can get a
mhm,
lot done, and especially if you're focused. Since you touched on AI, and we talked about this earlier, there's a lot of hand wringing these days over AI taking our jobs.
mhm,
I liken it to the Industrial Revolution, where the Industrial Revolution, yeah, it did take people's jobs, but it reallocated a lot of the labor resources. And so the people that were, building, doing things by hand and building out like banging on pieces of iron to sort of be part of like a horse and buggy, they
mhm.
had to evolve into different types of work, right? So I think we're going to see the same thing with AI, but I'd love to get your take. Is this a legitimate worry? Now that I've said it, I don't think it is. And if so, what can people do to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I'm sitting in your camp on this one. It will take jobs, but it won't take it'll take the jobs that existed before. Jobs will still exist. Humans are not going to stop working. And we'll have a much clearer picture of what that looks like in the next 5 to 10 years. Um, but understanding what that is today is pretty challenging. There was um, an article that was recently released by Anthropic and sort of showed a diagram of what's capable today, what's being done today. So you can see what's coming, and where the gaps are if you want to innovate with AI. It spelled that out really clearly, but that's only where AI is today. So as far as jobs, humans are going to continue working and contributing. But yeah, what we did last year is not what we're ever going to do again as a society.
Well, it's interesting too. So, Anthropic, for those tracking along, is the parent company of a tool called Claude, which is one of the leading. Everyone, I think, that doesn't really know that much about generative AI knows ChatGPT. That's like the Kleenex of the the AI world. But there are things like Gemini, which is Google's tool. There's Copilot, which is Microsoft's tool, and lots of others. But Claude is the one. They also just told the government essentially, no, thank you. We're not going to let you use us for nefarious purposes. And so a lot of
Mhm.
people have started to migrate. They're also one of the better tools, I think, out there. Um, so let's wrap up with this and we'll get to some lighter questions since we're solving all of society's ills here. And that is, if you could look out 10 years, what does reaching higher look like for Alaina Percival? Is it more board seats, a new venture, or perhaps a different kind of advocacy entirely?
I feel like the world is my oyster. Right now, I am interested in board seats. That's a focus for me, but also for unlocking that for other women. Whenever I take on a new role, it's how can I figure this out, pay this forward, and unlock it for other underrepresented people in the space. And so certainly around board seats, but I would say um, I still have founder energy in me, but I'm honestly just loving what I'm doing right now, and investing and supporting other entrepreneurs to win.
Well, I mean, amen to you for doing that. That's great because we do know we still need a lot more diversity in a variety of different ways on boards, right? Because that's the way you sort of change the complex of the company. There's
Mhm.
one last question which I didn't ask you before that I do want to follow up on, which is I think the traditional path for most leaders like yourself is you go from a startup or a big technology company and then you go into the nonprofit world. You
Mhm.
went from brand to nonprofit being the larger proportion of sort of where you've spent your energy to going into venture capital, and that's an unusual path. Although if I'm a betting man, I would say the fact that you had this huge, vast resource of access to coders, to leaders of companies, understanding sort
Mhm.
of the evolution of technology. But just tell us a little bit about that different path that you took to probably the more traditional leader.
Yeah, I like a challenge, which is, maybe a sign of both an optimist and a founder. I see challenges as big opportunities, and it means I like to really reinvent myself. When I feel as though things are getting easy, I've figured it out a bit too much, and I want to go on and grow in some other way. So right now, I'm learning so much because I'm doing something new for the first time in 10, 15 years. And it's really amazing to kind of be in a spot where I can give myself grace to learn and, make mistakes and build upon that, which certainly when you're leading a company, the pressure because um, it impacts your whole team, your company, all of the people, stakeholders around you. It's certainly a lot more pressure. So I'm absolutely loving being in a learning moment, and reinventing myself from moving to a different country and choosing the hard path, is something that I imagine I'll choose over and over again in my life, but hopefully in a very positive way.
Well, I wish you nothing but the best on that front. And, obviously you having the empathy that you have and the knowledge that you have and being able to apply it to startups, particularly leaning into the women founders and doing it in the South and doing it in a way that really does help bring the best out of AI is music to my ears. So we're going to wrap up with a few, again, back to the lighter questions, although one is sort of a moderately like the, how would you change the world question up front. I do a regular thing, probably every like 4 or 5 months, where I post on Facebook and I ask people for their show recommendations. And I have friends that joke, like, I love that when you do that because I always get like 200 or 300 responses, and so it helps my
Mhm.
wife and me decide what we're going to watch for the next couple months. But what is a show or a podcast that you are binging right now? Ideally, something on the lighter side. Doesn't have to be funny, although you did indicate up front that you like your comedy movies. So,
That's a tough one for me. I have two small kids, and my to watch list is 7 years old
uh
at
huh.
this point. So, um, you know, what I'm going to watch right now is I probably go back to my old school roots, and like the old MacGyver is what I'll throw on if I'm have a few minutes to watch something.
Yeah, and I would encourage the listeners, especially younger listeners, to look that one up. We won't sort of tip it for them, but I think a lot of people probably know the word MacGyver from this idea of you can put things together like with plastic, rubber bands and gum and a, shoe tack or whatever. But it was a pretty cool show at the time. And look at it this way, Alaina, when you sort of come up for air, you're going to have so much content that you won't ever have to worry. AI will have to tell you like, what to prioritize in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next question, and this is the bigger than a bread box one as well, but biggest regret.
Um, I would say it's kind of a constant struggle of um, wanting to always be on the right side and not willing to push hard enough or kind of ruffle enough feathers. And it's, the way I've built and done everything that I've done and been very successful. But I think that there's such strength in being able to be a little more direct than what I have in me.
Well, you and I share that same trait, something I battle with, and I've gotten a little bit better at it, but it is hard because I am very much a diplomat, and I don't always love to ruffle feathers, but you and I can both work on that as our lifelong goal over the next several years. Last one, which is definitely more of a fun one to end on, but a band or artist, ideally one that's no longer around, that you would have liked to have most seen.
Oh, um, I am completely uncool when it comes to music. I love it in the moment. I love Latin music. I love world music. Uh, but I'd probably have to go with something incredibly classic like the Beatles.
That's a recurring theme, and it's funny I wasn't seeing you go there, but it is one where, they were just such an iconic band, and
Mhm.
it's a little bit of a tease, right? Because you do still get Paul touring once in a while, and Ringo, and I had heard there were rumors that those two plus what is his name, Eric Clapton, were going to do sort of like a quasi Beatle reunion, even though Clapton wasn't with the Beatles, but I think sort of threaded in and out of their lives. But yeah, they were just such an incredible band and would have been lovely to see it. And I probably could have seen them had I been, I think since I am older than you, I probably could have seen them at age 5 or 6. But at that point, you never knew that they weren't going to last forever. So it's why
Yeah.
I have a rule with my kids. If there's a band you want to go see them. Nirvana was one that I
Mhm.
was like, I had 3 opportunities to, didn't. And then Kurt left us. And so it still breaks my heart. So people go see those bands if you want to see those bands, and obviously that's a good one because you couldn't have seen them. But with that, we'll wrap up. Alaina, thank you so much for spending the time. It's great to get to know you a little bit better.
Same.
Best of luck with the work that you are doing today, and I do hope that our paths can run or come across each other in the physical world at some point in time.
Yeah, same. Thank you for having me.
Of course.